We had quite different views, confusing views maybe even, but now we would like to look for some ideas how to cope with it. We had already some presentations, but I think now we will concretely look into methods and possibilities how to cope with volatility. We have three speakers. We have Jean Balie from the FAO, who will talk about price incentives and disincentives to agricultural production in selected African countries. And then Dr. Eckhard Gut from the Global Forum for Food and Agriculture in Berlin will tell us how to cope with price volatility from an EU perspective. We had already one perspective from the Farmers Association, but now we might get another one. That is quite interesting to see. And then finally, Aleko Saris from the University of Athens will tell us about the international responses to vulnerabilities of developing countries for food commodity price risks. So, very interesting presentations. We are already late, so we have to keep very strictly the 20 minutes in order to have left a few minutes for questions afterwards. The first presentation will start, and this is Jean Balie from the FAO. Please.
Good afternoon. Yes, does it work? So thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know whether I will be able to provide answers to the various possibilities for coping with price volatility, but what I will definitely present is an example of a program that is currently implemented by FAO in order to help African countries monitor and analyze the effects of policies. So that is a program that started in 2009, and that is jointly implemented by FAO, the OECD, and obviously in partnership with governments of the 10 African countries that are currently covered. What I will present today, yes, well, we'll follow this outline. First, I will try to relate, because you see that the title is slightly different. It's not exactly focusing on price volatility, so I will try to explain the connection between the price volatility, which is topic of the seminar, and the price incentive analysis. Then provide some key findings of these price incentives in the 10 African countries, and look at a number of policy dimensions, particularly the issue of policy coherence in decision making in Africa, and conclude. The important thing to recall is that the results that I will present are actually results from a period that ranges from 2005 to 2010. We also have more recent results that are being collected now for 11 and 12, but I'm not yet able to present them, but they are soon going to be available online. This is an overview and a selection of results, mostly aggregated, across the 10 countries. But we also have more detailed analysis available for each country and a number of commodities for within countries. So the period, as I said, 2005, 2010 was also marked by the fact that it was, at least for part of the period, a period of high food prices and high volatility, particularly in some of these African countries. And we are looking at a number of policy decisions that were made, typically trade-related policies, with a number of decisions related to relaxing import duties to cope with high food prices in an attempt to actually focus or shift the attention of policies from producers to consumers. Also a number of other types of policies that have to do with input subsidies that were still being heavily used during the period, but also a number of other determinants of price volatility, such as export bans. So what we're trying to look at is whether we can quantify the effects of these policies and try to look at what was the result in terms of incentives for production for farmers and at the same time for consumers. So the methodology that is used is common to the methodology used by the OECD, which is based on the price comparison, where we look at the domestic prices, particularly at farm gate level, and we compare it with the reference price, which is typically the international price. And we look at these trade barriers and also a number of other policies to see whether these domestic prices have been able to adjust to their international reference. And in some cases, we will see that this adjustment has been rather difficult. And it's also clear that in the near future, we expect that in these African countries, the connection between price volatility and the price transmission issue and the price levels that the farmers actually get is going to drive a number of production decisions. And so we will show that in a minute. So the first question is about this. Are farmers in Africa receiving price incentives? So, and in the literature, you can see that there are a number of papers that indicate that increasingly price in developing countries are adjusting and aligning with the overall trends in international markets. What we find is relatively different. So here you have a slide that indicates that for the period covered, which is 2005-2010, the farmers were still receiving negative price incentive or price disincentives, significance. Of course, these disincentives are declining, and in the recent period, they are actually reduced and coming close to zero, which is what one would expect in terms of distortions, eliminating distortions, but still negative. So this is the picture of the aggregate for the 10 countries across all commodities. We covered 24 commodities in total, 10 countries, as I said. It includes export, import substitutes, but also food security crops. So if we go into details, more details than that, we see that the prices that farmers received were depressed on average by 10% over the period. If we look at what happened for specific countries, we see that for these 10 countries, which are Burkina Faso, Mali, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Malawi, Mozambique, Nigeria, and I think I've not forgotten any. Basically, the picture is for the two periods that we have tried to distinguish, 2005-2007 and 2008-2010, negative price incentives or price disincentives, with a few exceptions. So that is a common pattern to the 10 African countries. If we look at groups of commodities, which is also an interesting thing, so looking at import substitutes, one would expect that actually this, given the policy decisions that were made, relaxing import duties and so on, we would see a number of price incentives. And actually, we do see that there is a better picture in terms of incentive, at least in 5 of the countries where farmers are receiving higher price level. However, contrary to what one would expect for export commodities, farmers are still being taxed, and in some cases, heavily taxed. That is also a similar picture for staple commodities. And that is also worrying for us in FAO, because this means this is disincentive to produce the crops that consumers and people living in rural areas consume and need. So if we look now at one example, which is maize, for example, which is produced in the 10 countries that we have analyzed, we can see that there is also a similar pattern. All countries have generated, through their policy environment, strong disincentives at farm level. over the period. And only in recent years, for 2 or 3 countries, we have noted a shift with a change with strong and more incentives, especially in Uganda, which is one of the few examples where we have a more liberalized policy environment with an adjustment and price incentives for maize producers. MAFAP, as is the acronym stands for Monitoring and Analyzing Food and Agricultural Policies, is also looking at one dimension which is, in an African context, particularly interesting. Is the effort to disentangle what we call the explicit policy effect from an implicit policy effect. So, looking at what would be the results of, in terms of distortions or disincentives arising not from explicit policy, for example tariffs, but from the lack of investment in infrastructure, or the cost, very high cost of transportation, or even bribes. So we have developed this market development gap indicator, which indicates that, contrary to what one would hope, inefficiencies in domestic value chains have increased over time and are one of the main sources of disincentives to farmers. So very often we see in the African policy debate that there is a need to adjust the policy environment, and we very much refer to the explicit policies, trade policies, a number of marketing policies, and so on. While we do show that there is a number of key concerns that have to do with the level of investment in order to bring the transportation cost down, or over very excessive costs that farmers face to channel and the channel that produce from the farm gate to the wholesale level, where they have to compete with imports for an input substitute, for example. And another part of this program looks at public expenditure, and which is not something I'm showing today. And that is, unfortunately, we also show that governments have not put significant effort in trying to spend money on these factors that would reduce distortions or disincentive arising from very high transportation costs. Here, I just give one example of the countries that we have analyzed for wheat. And we see here again that I think it's green. The green line indicates the nominal rate of protection for wheat in Ethiopia, and we do see that overall Ethiopian farmers have faced strong disincentives in wheat production. The shaded line is actually the representation of the market development gap, which could be translated into the additional disincentives that farmers face due to this market development gap. In other words, the additional cost that they have to bear. And one of the key conclusions that we have is, by addressing these market development gap constraints on farmers through appropriate public expenditure, we believe that it would be possible to bring and to change the patterns of price disincentive structure, for example, in this wheat production market. So what about the story of policy coherence? So here I'm giving one example that is coming from Mali, where I try to show that governments are actually sending confusing signals to farmers. Here is one example of the kind of analysis that we do on government spending on rice in Mali, where we show that on average over the period, the Malian government has spent something like 24 or 25, I don't remember the percentage, into rice production, plus a share of what is spent on grains, because sometimes it's not possible to distinguish, and so part of this is also going to rice. So there is a strong commitment from the government to actually support rice production through input subsidies, through investment in irrigation, so a very clear political stance on this. However, if we look at what is happening on the price support side, we have a mixed picture, where we do see that farmers in rice producers in Mali are actually receiving strong disincentives, price disincentives. And this throughout the period. The red line is the price that farmer gets, the dotted line is the price that they could receive, and the upper dotted line is the price they could receive if inefficiency would be eliminated. So we see that here it's increasing. So on the one side, the government says, produce. We help you through irrigation schemes, through input subsidies. On the other side, the market signals are saying you should not produce because there are strong disincentives. As a result, the production in Mali is still lagging behind with respect to projections. And there is it's not a surprise that actually the targets are not met in Mali. So what can we learn from this? First, well, a number of lessons. Market and trade policies have not produced the expected results. If you look at a number of policy documents throughout Africa, there are strong statements and commitments to support production. However, production has increased a bit, but not to the extent and with the speed that we should have seen, given the attention that was given to the various possible measures that were envisaged. And so this is because producers still face price disincentives. Value chain inefficiencies are persistent, and they are not well addressed through public expenditure. Policy coherence, as I just shown with one example, and we have many similar examples, are still a key issue. With policy effects that are actually not consistent, market price support not consistent with what is done through public expenditure, and also vis-à-vis the governmental objectives. We do believe that for that reason there is a strong need for governments to continue to invest in mechanisms to support monitoring and analysis of what is going on markets. Unfortunately, the data issue is still a problem in Africa. We still have very weak systems to monitor what is happening in markets. And one of the problems is basically the lack of information. So the governments do not have the necessary information to inform better decision making. What is the role of FAO, of MAFAP? One is what I'm trying to do here, advocate. And second is to try to do more of this type of analysis in fora that are actually national, at national level or regional level. So regional economic communities or national governments, to try to bring this information to the fore and try to convince governments that they need to invest in this kind of tools. What FAO is trying to do is not so much to produce this type of analysis itself, but try to develop the capacity in governments to do that by themselves, so that they would increasingly become autonomous. In the near future, this program is expected to expand from the 10 countries that are currently covered to 18 countries in Africa, with the support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as the Netherlands, and most probably also the European Union. Thank you very much.
So that was perfectly in time. I guess we have even the possibility to have one or two questions for clarification. Please.
John, just one quick comment. I think you should, as a robustness check of that disincentive graph that you showed with prices, I think the relevant price you should be looking at is the ratio of output prices to input prices. Because the input subsidies might actually, be giving farmers a higher real price. And the disincentive might come from other sectors which you cover deeply in MAFAP, like transportation costs, cost of marketing, et cetera, et cetera. Just as a robustness check, it might not change anything.
Should I answer now?
Yeah, maybe you can answer now, and then we have one more question.
Sorry, I fully agree. In the first phase of MAFAP, we have focused on computing nominal rate of protection or nominal rate of assistance, but we do envision to produce effective rate of protection or assistance by including what is happening on the input markets as well. The problem is data, and so it takes time to actually collect data that is sufficiently reliable to actually compute these kind of indicators. But the intention is there, and it will be done systematically from 2011 onwards.
Okay, one short question and short answer, please.
Along similar lines, have you looked at the role of the exchange rate, or the exchange rate plays in the rate of protection or subsidization or taxation? Same with regard to the world market price that has changed significantly over time.
So yes, to the first question of the exchange rate is included. So at various levels. One is it's included in the way we adjust for the reference price and to bring it down to the farm gate level. So that is we use the nominal exchange rate, but we also use the shadow exchange rate. And this time it is included in the market development gap. We are not totally happy about the way we include it in the market development gap, because then it makes the story of separating what is policy related and non-policy related more complex to analyze. But this is what we have for the time being. So we do account for the exchange rate misalignment. However, in most African countries, is not really an issue, except for French-speaking, the Francophone countries where the franc CFA is pegged to the euro, and therefore we have an issue of evaluation of the exchange rate. And Ethiopia, what I show on Ethiopia, most of the market development gap is actually explained by this exchange rate misalignment. And the second one, the world market price. Yes, but that was very controversial. So the way we adjust for the reference price, this has led us in very huge discussions with the OECD on how is it that we can touch the reference price. And actually, we in some cases we decided, because it was actually not meaningful to use the reference price, the world market reference price, but we use a regional one. Because of the marketing patterns, and that actually the reference was not meaningful at all.
Okay, thank you very much.